So Rufus, the second season of Man in the High Castle just aired on Amazon. What were expectations like from you guys going into season 2 after the success of season 1?
I don't know. It's always a strange thing because one has hopes about what will happen with the characters or how deep you'll go or what happened with the story. But to a certain extent, we kept in the dark, and often people would come up and say, what's going to happen in season 2? And when I answered, there was always a certain amount of wishful thinking. One can only, especially if you have somebody who thinks and has an opinion and takes a position, you end up having a way that you want it to go, and that can sometimes come into conflict with the way that it does go. And this is one of the problems of doing a long-form show. My expectations, my hopes were that, as far as my character was concerned, that it didn't get spread too wide too quickly, and that we managed to go deeper into the John Smith and the world that we knew. Because, whereas a certain part of me was a little bit jealous about other characters and other actors getting to see their alternate selves, which is, as an actor, really appeals to me. I kind of felt that it was would mean more for the currency of the show and for the character if it could bear the weight to go as deep as one could with John Smith in terms of his past, in terms of the conflict between the person that he would have been had the war turned out differently and the person that he ended up for pragmatic, possibly reasons, the conflict between those two things. And I was glad that it started to go in that direction. For me, tempting though it would be, and fun to play alternate versions of Smith, and I would love to at some point, I felt that as far as my character was concerned, there was enough really interesting stuff to be dug into about the actual existing history that he found himself in before we started to branch out.
So for people who haven't seen the show yet, can you talk a little bit about who your character is? Who is John Smith?
John Smith, the clue's in the name. I mean, he's in a kind of twisted way, he's an all-American guy, a kind of lost, twisted version of an everyman. This is at least how I see him. I think that is why he was given this iconic American name. He's a man that finds himself in this alternate history, which is set at the time the book was written, 1962, in an America that has been under Nazi and Japanese occupation since the end of the Second World War. Second World War that was in which the Japanese Pacific states and the Nazis were victorious. The history had played out differently, not just from the second half of the war, but from way back. A set of circumstances had given rise to the possibility that the Germans would win. America didn't pull itself out of the Great Depression. The Germans went into Russia earlier. Pearl Harbor was bombed earlier. All of these different things led to America being overrun. And this is an America that's divided between the East Coast and the West Coast. The East Coast is Nazi, and to a certain extent, seemingly happily Nazi. There's certain types of people that you don't see, but the side of that world that is presented is one full of order, trains running on time, happy, smiling faces, just like in Nazi propaganda. And all of the people that kind of managed to escape the clutches of that found themselves found their way into the no man's land, which is the buffer zone between, round about the Rockies, between the Japanese Pacific states, who rule over the Americans in California and that area. So John Smith is a man who was previously in the American Army and switched sides when it became, after the fall of the first hydrogen bomb on Washington, when the resistance against the Nazi forces risked turning America into the site of a civil war, picked the winning side in order, as he felt, to protect his family, to stop more nuclear bombs from being dropped. In his effort, as a patriot, as he saw it, to save his country, he went to the side of the Nazis, as many people did. And having made that expedient choice, he finds himself 15 years later, very high up in the American Reich, as an all-American Nazi hero. And everyone in his life and everyone that knows him and the society he lives in views him as a great example of an upstanding, moral American male. However, he is still inside him, I think, is the man that he would have been. And he witnessed things in the early days of the Nazi occupation, horrors of which he can't quite reconcile with the view of himself and his country that he liked to. And I think his way of dealing with that is by just pulling the mask further and further onto his face, which, you know, these doubts sometimes make people more dangerous. You know? It's often the case that it's the people who are trying to quell their doubts that commit the atrocities. You know, so he's a very dangerous man. I think he's a very, in his way, compassionate man. He's a man with a conscience, and I think that only serves to exacerbate all the other things. So he's potentially a very complex man and a very interesting character, but also potentially, if we're not careful, a bit of a cardboard villain if we let it go the wrong way. And that, for me, is the struggle of the writing, the struggle of the performance, the struggle of the whole thing. And it's the conflict between those two things. The conflict, in fact, that he has is similar to the conflict that I have between him being one thing and the other. You know.
Well, how do you strike that balance, I guess? How do you, in a sense, humanize this guy?
I think by not going for the easy choice. I mean, laziness is the great enemy. You know, it's like when you realize that you are not having perceptions, you are just accepting and utilizing borrowed perceptions of other people, that you are utilizing other people's descriptions of the world around you. You know? And it's what bad acting is. Not that I'm some great arbiter of good acting, but it's when I'm bad, it's because I don't examine. No, sometimes I'm bad for other reasons, but a lot of the time, when you make a bad choice, it's because of laziness. Not wanting to be the guy that asks that question again. Just when everyone's beginning to roll their eyes, when you don't understand, sometimes it's tempting to say, yeah, I get it, because you don't want to be that guy. I've learned, as I've got older, to fight against my natural instincts to be a people pleaser and to not mind irritating the crowd, or not mind looking like the stupid guy in the room by asking a question again. Because, you'll see it, that the writers can do it, the actors can do it, I can do it, where you will make a set of assumptions based on things that you're not aware of. You are being operated upon by past perceptions and prejudices. That a character will speak in a certain way because, I don't know why, because I saw a film once when I was a kid, and that's what they do. If you give a guy who's playing a Nazi gloves, he will pull them off one finger at a time, and he won't know why. It'll look quite good too. It'll be tempting. Speaking as someone who's faced to that, it's really hard not to pull a glove off one finger at a time, and especially when you're playing a Nazi. And I'm not saying that I've won every one of these little battles, but, there's an interesting example is what happens to people when they're coming in and playing, maybe a day player. Often very good actors that come in and play a character for one or two scenes. And they're playing, they will come in and they will be doing a slightly Anglified, Teutonic German accent. And they will suddenly have a kind of, a tautness, a physical erectness. These are all great choices if you make them and if they're appropriate, but often the choices make you. It's just like when I was at drama school, whenever we were playing Americans, people's mouths start doing a chewing nose or whatever, they start doing a De Niro kind of chin move or whatever. These things, you don't know you're doing them. And there's nothing wrong inherently with any of these things if you make the choice. But when you're performing something that is within the wheelbase of things that you've grown up watching, you're in danger of letting a lot of decisions make you. And I think where this character is potentially interesting, where this show is interesting, is where to show where those things diverge. Right? The idea that what makes him a Nazi is his job, his uniform, and the set of beliefs that he claims to aspire to, or and everything else that you could possibly make not what you'd assume. Let's push in that direction and see how that goes. And sometimes I kick myself because I realise there's opportunities I've missed. But that's kind of what you do. You just let vigilance, and not making assumptions. I like to think of them as, I really look for opportunities to be as colloquial, as pally, as fun. All of these things, I don't get many opportunities. It's quite arid land. When I get a chance for that kind of thing, I leap upon it. You can't make those opportunities for yourself. You have to scour them in the script. But that's a very long and elaborate answer. But that's.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's great success, by the way. That is just the ongoing, daily. That's what's interesting about the job.
Absolutely. I'm curious, had you read the book before you came on to this project? No. It's been a while since I've read the book. So
no, and I didn't read it immediately either. I got the phone call, I was sent the script, and before I looked at the script, I did a quick Wikipedia search of the book. Just enough to see, how am I going to start? Do I want to read the book first, read the script? I took moments to discover that my character wasn't in the book, because I wanted to know what to be wary of. Now, my immediate suspicion upon being sent any script is this a one-dimensional villain? Not that one-dimensional villain means no. Villain per se, not necessarily. But my discovery that the character didn't exist in the book really set off alarm bells. Because normally when a villain character is added, it's normally an executive decision in order to bring someone in to kind of give ballast and to be one thing and blah, 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 which, I've found myself doing by accident before. It wasn't even deliberate then, but it's not really something I'd like to do to sign on to for a long time. Anyway, once I was reassured, kind of, and I read the second episode, which was also written, that wasn't quite the case. There was potential for this character to be a far more interesting kind of, character study, and someone stuck between those two worlds. I did a lot of research about Nazis and how they justified themselves and what was going through the minds of the people in Nazi Germany, even the people in high command who did not at the time believe they were evil, or some of the people that found themselves at the crux, like Albert Speer, etc., etc. And then after exhausting that, well, not quite exhausting, I went back to the book and was blown away by it for a completely different reason. I wasn't reading it for clues, It was a more pure. It can be kind of. It's not the ideal way to read a book. Is kind of search for tips on your character. It's nice to be able to read it for other reasons. And luckily, when I was fully assured that there wasn't really much in it for me in terms of character study, I was able to read it in a kind of unencumbered way, and I found it very moving and actually incredibly useful. The book, it's an amazing book, but it confirmed what I'd hoped it would be about, which is about what people do in order to live. How do people get on? What happens to people's minds under subjugation or on the other side? What do people do to themselves in order to live through their own story?
Mm-hmm. There are probably a lot of people who watch this show and are fearful for their own futures. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how the relevancy of this story that's set 50 years ago to today.
Yeah, there was a point early on. We've had questions like, "Oh, did you realize, that it would be so relevant, etc., etc." At the time I read the script, at the time we were doing season 1, it felt like it was eerily relevant. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I could do without it being this fucking relevant. I mean, you know, so keen to be a show that's like, you know, touches on the moment that I'm prepared to, you know, trade in the future happiness of the world. I mean, I'd rather be on a less relevant show, you know, with a different setup, frankly. But, you know, so it is. I mean, I think that it's a very interesting time for this show. The reason it's very, very relevant, and it was also relevant when he wrote it. I mean, you know, he wrote it for a reason. It's because it's about how people normalize, you know, and we can see it. It's like yesterday's horror. It doesn't seem to be horrific in the same way. Like the fact that we just get used to ingesting these things with our cereal until they just become the background. And yeah, there's the fact that why I was very interested in it when I read it is that the idea, which I've always been fascinated by, that in Nazi Germany people weren't all like, you know, they believed they were profoundly moral victims standing up for themselves against these evil whatevers, and they'd been so thoroughly convinced that nothing could attack that mindset. And it's something we can see in this country, we can see it, and you know, the polarization and the fact that people just truly believe that they are right, to the extent that part of that mindset is the dehumanization of the other group, so that anything that causes pain to the other group becomes validated. And it's extraordinary where that can go. That can go anywhere, you know, but it starts off with dehumanizing the views of other people. And it's something we all seem to be capable of. But, you know, this is an object lesson in how that can become, you know, part of the society we live in.
Well, Rufus, thank you so much, and congratulations on another season of Man in the High Castle. I look forward to seeing more.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.